We loved the 70s and 80s for its blockbusters and iconic characters, but behind the scenes of your favorite classics, things weren't always so rosy and nostalgic. Before modern safety unions, CGI, and mental health awareness, movie sets could be places of genuine psychological warfare and life-threatening danger. From directors pushing actors to the brink of insanity, to productions that used real human remains as props, some of the most famous films of the decade were born out of absolute chaos. To Stanley Kubrick, a movie was much more than a professional project. It was an obsession. But for Shelley Duvall, that obsession turned into a nightmare. To capture the pure, unadulterated terror of windy torrents, Kubrick meticulously manufactured a psychological collapse. He believed that if Duvall felt truly safe or comfortable, her performance would be fake, so he set out to ensure she felt as isolated and persecuted as the character she was playing. Kubrick's tactics were brutal. He strictly forbade the crew from speaking to Duvall, showing her any kindness, or even complimenting her work. He spent months berating her in front of the entire staff, often shouting that she was wasting everyone's time. This atmospheric pressure peaked during the filming of the staircase scene. What appears as a few minutes of tension in the film took weeks to shoot, with Duvall forced to swing a baseball bat through 127 grueling takes. You can imagine, by the end of it, her hands were raw and her voice was gone from screaming. The toll on her body was catastrophic. The chronic, high-level stress caused her hair to fall out in clumps, and she frequently carried bottles of salt water with her because she cried her body dry. Years later, Duvall would look back on the experience not with pride, but as a period of profound trauma, describing it as the most difficult experience of her life. In the final cut of The Shining, when you see Wendy Torrance shaking and gasping for air, you aren't seeing pure acting. You are watching a woman in the midst of a genuine, prolonged, nervous breakdown. The climactic finale of Poltergeist is one of the most harrowing sequences in horror history. Actress JoBeth Williams spent 5 days filming in a massive, muddy trench filled with water, struggling to escape as skeletons rose from the depths to surround her. It was a demanding shoot that required her to be submerged in filth for hours, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the macabre secret hidden just beneath the surface. A play that sounds like a plot point from a horror movie itself, the production used real human remains. At the time, the makeup and effects department discovered a disturbing logistical reality. Sourcing actual medical-grade human skeletons from biological supply houses was actually cheaper than commissioning realistic-looking plastic ones. So to save on the budget, the studio opted for the real thing. JoBeth Williams remained in the dark throughout the entire process, believing the bones bobbing around her in the muck were merely high-quality props. It wasn't until the film was finished that she discovered she had been treading water and screaming in a pool filled with the actual dead. This revelation didn't just haunt the actress, it became the foundation for the infamous Poltergeist curse. When several cast members met tragic, untimely deaths shortly after the trilogy's release, many in Hollywood began to whisper that the production had invited a dark energy onto the set by disturbing the dead for the sole reason of cutting costs for a box office thrill. There are movies that are difficult to film, and then there is Roar, a production so reckless it's a miracle no one was actually killed. Conceived by The Exorcist producer Noel Marshall and his wife, actress Tippi Hedren, the film was intended to be a family adventure promoting animal conservation. To achieve realism, they decided to live with and film over 150 untrained large cats, including lions, tigers, cheetahs, and leopards, on their private ranch in California. The result was a decade-long bloodbath. Because the animals were not trained and the cast was living among them, the lions viewed the set as their territory and the humans as either intruders or prey. By the time filming finally wrapped, over 70 members of the cast and crew had been documented as injured. The attacks were gruesome. Noel Marshall was bitten so many times he developed gangrene. The cinematographer, Jan de Bont, was literally scalped by a lion and required 220 stitches to reattach his scalp. The toll on the family was even worse. A young Melanie Griffith was clawed across the face during a scene, requiring 50 stitches and extensive facial reconstructive surgery to avoid permanent disfigurement. Tippi Hedren herself suffered a fractured leg and scalp wounds after a lioness bit her head. Despite the mounting casualties, Marshall refused to stop production, driven by an almost fanatical obsession with finishing his vision. The film took 11 years to complete, cost $17 million, and earned barely $2 million at the box office, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of scars and a reputation as the most irresponsible production in the history of cinema. Totally not worth it. We're breaking away from the 80s with this one. While The Omen was released in the mid-70s, its legacy of cursed productions defined the 80s obsession with the supernatural. The events surrounding this film were so statistically improbable that many involved became convinced they were being targeted by a dark external force. It began in the air. Lead actor Gregory Peck and executive producer Mace Neufeld were on two separate planes traveling months apart, and both aircraft were struck by lightning. Just weeks later, another plane the production had intended to use for filming crashed, unaliving everyone on board. The curse followed the crew to the ground with terrifying relentlessness. During a stay at a hotel in London, Neufeld and the cast narrowly escaped a bombing by the Irish Republican Army. Later, a stuntman was attacked by trained dogs that turned unexpectedly feral, and a zookeeper who assisted with the film's baboon scene was fatally mauled just one day after the crew finished shooting at the park. However, the most chilling incident occurred after the film was released. John Richardson, the special effects director responsible for the movie's famous, gruesome decapitation scene, was involved in a horrific car accident in Holland. His assistant was unalived in the crash, decapitated in a manner that almost perfectly mirrored the scene Richardson had designed for the film. According to legend, when Richardson crawled from the wreckage, he looked up to see a road sign pointing toward the town of Omen and noted the distance on a nearby marker, exactly 66.6 kilometers. This hasn't been proven true, but fits neatly with the lore tied to these insane events. It wasn't just a series of accidents, it was a sequence of events so eerie they made the fictional horror on screen seem pale by comparison. On screen, Kramer vs. Kramer is a heartbreaking drama about a bitter custody battle, but off camera, the relationship between leads Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep was defined by a different kind of bitterness. Hoffman, a devout practitioner of method acting, believed that the only way to get a masterpiece out of the film was to provoke genuine, raw pain from his co-star, even if it meant crossing serious professional and personal boundaries. The tension turned physical on the very first day of filming. During a scene in the hallway, without any warning or prior rehearsal, Hoffman reached out and slapped Streep across the face with full force. This obviously left her stunned and humiliated in front of the crew. But the physical strike was only the beginning. To keep Streep in a state of constant emotional fragility, Hoffman began a campaign of psychological warfare. He knew that Streep was still grieving the recent death of her partner, actor John Cazale, who had passed away from cancer just months earlier. To elicit a breakdown for the cameras, Hoffman reportedly leaned in and whispered Cazale's name in Streep's ear right before the director yelled, "Action." He used her real-life trauma as a weapon to sharpen his scenes, a tactic Streep later described as overstepping to a degree that was hateful. I concur. The result was an Oscar-winning performance, but at what cost? It was built on a foundation of genuine, non-consensual suffering that Streep would refuse to forget for decades. Crispin Glover's performance as George McFly in the original Back to the Future was a breakout hit, but when it came time for the 1989 sequel, Glover was nowhere to be found. After a high-profile pay dispute and creative disagreements with the producers, Glover refused to return. Most productions would have simply recast the role or written the character out, but the producers of Back to the Future Part 2 took a path that was both technically brilliant and ethically wrong. To trick the audience into thinking Glover was still in the film, the production hired actor Jeffrey Weissman and put him through hours of makeup. They used actual physical molds of Crispin Glover's face taken during the first film to create prosthetics that mimicked his exact features. They then choreographed the scene so George was often seen from behind, in the background, or wearing sunglasses. They even interlaced actual footage of Glover from the 1985 original to complete the illusion. You can imagine Glover was horrified to see a ghost of himself on screen. He sued the filmmakers for the unauthorized use of his likeness. The studio stole his identity to sell a product. The lawsuit was so significant that it forced a landmark settlement and fundamentally changed SAG-AFTRA rules. Because of this case, it is now strictly illegal for a studio to use an actor's physical likeness or facial molds to create a performance without their explicit consent. A rule that remains a cornerstone of actor protections, especially today with how digital doubles are so easy to recreate. If there is a fine line between genius and insanity, director Werner Herzog didn't just cross it during the filming of Fitzcarraldo, he burned the bridge behind him. Obsessed with the idea of a man pulling a steamship over a mountain in the Amazon basin, Herzog refused to use special effects or scale models. He insisted on doing it for real. The result was a production so extreme it was described by those on set as a death march. The impossible feat of moving a 320-ton steamship up a 40-degree incline resulted in catastrophe. Indigenous workers hired for the crew suffered horrific injuries as the massive vessel repeatedly slid back down the muddy slope. The environment was lethal. 2 separate plane crashes occurred during production, and the tension was so thick that the local indigenous chief reportedly pulled Herzog aside and offered to literally send the lead actor to meet his maker, Klaus Kinski, just to end the constant screaming and volatility on set. Herzog declined, but only because he needed Kinski alive to finish the film. The physical toll on the crew was like something out of a war zone. One Peruvian logger was bitten by a deadly snake and, knowing he had minutes to live, was forced to amputate his own foot with a chainsaw to stop the venom from reaching his heart. Another crew member survived being shot right through the throat by an arrow during an attack by a local tribe. By the time the film was finished, Herzog famously remarked that the jungle was vile and base, and that he felt like a conquistador who had lost everything. Fitzcarraldo stands today as a testament to the idea of unhinged realism, where the price of a beautiful shot was often paid in blood. The 70s and 80s gave us some of the greatest cinema in history, but as we've seen, the cost of that magic could sometimes be higher than anyone could bargain for. From psychological trauma to real-life curses and jungle madness, these sets were as dark as the movies they produced. So, which of these behind-the-scenes stories shocked you the most? Is there a movie we missed that deserves to be on this list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. Till the next one.